This happened to me about 3 years ago when I was living alone in a small apartment just outside the city. At the time, I worked from home doing IT support, so most days it was just me inside the apartment for hours. One night, around 10:45, my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I ignore calls like that, but I was expecting a package delivery the next day and thought maybe it was related. So I answered. I said hello twice before anybody responded. Then a man's voice quietly said, "Daniel?" I told him he had the wrong number. There was a pause. Then he asked, "Who is this?" I remember thinking that was kind of weird. Usually people apologize and hang up. But I just told him my first name and asked who he was trying to reach. He ignored the question. Instead, he said, "How long have you had this number?" That immediately made me uncomfortable. I asked again who he was trying to call. Silence. Then he hung up. The whole thing gave me a weird feeling, but I tried not to think too much about it. Wrong numbers happen all the time. The next night, he called again. Same number. This time I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. The second I picked up, he said, "You weren't home earlier." I just sat there confused. I asked what he meant. He said, "I called around 6. The thing was, he hadn't. I checked my call history while talking to him. There were no missed calls from that number. I told him he must be mistaken. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "No, I mean your apartment." I remember feeling this instant wave of panic. I asked him who he was and how he knew where I lived. He ignored that too. Instead he asked, "Do you always leave your kitchen light on that late?" I immediately looked toward my kitchen. The light was on. At that point, I hung up. I locked my apartment door, checked the peephole, checked the windows, everything. I even looked outside from my bedroom window down into the parking lot, but I didn't see anyone. I barely slept that night. The next morning I convinced myself it had to be some kind of prank. Maybe somebody in the building knew me. Maybe they saw me through the windows and decided to mess with me. Still, I bought blackout curtains that same day. For about a week, nothing happened. Then on Friday night, I got another call. Unknown number again, but I recognized the voice immediately. Before I could even say anything, he said, "The curtains make it harder." I felt my chest tighten. I asked him what he wanted. He laughed softly. Not loud or crazy sounding. Honestly, that made it worse. Then he said, "I like the old setup better." I hung up instantly and blocked the number. 10 seconds later, my apartment buzzer went off downstairs. I froze. Nobody ever buzzed my apartment that late. Then it buzzed again. And again. I went to the intercom and asked who it was. No answer. Just breathing. I disconnected it from the wall after that. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow footsteps. Back and forth. I turned off every light and stayed completely silent. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. Then came 3 knocks. Very soft. Not aggressive. That honestly scared me more. I called the police while standing in my bathroom whispering into the phone. By the time officers arrived, nobody was there. I explained everything, but without proof there wasn't much they could do. They checked outside and searched the area around the building. One officer asked if I had enemies or an ex-boyfriend or something. I told him no. Before leaving, one of them suggested I keep my blinds shut and maybe stay with a friend for a few nights. I didn't have anywhere else to go. The really terrifying part happened 2 nights later. I came home from getting takeout and immediately noticed something sitting on the floor outside my apartment door. It was a grocery bag. Inside was a box of light bulbs. The exact brand I used in my kitchen. There was no note. Nothing else. Just the bulbs. I went completely numb when I saw them because earlier that week one of my kitchen lights had burned out. I had replaced it while standing directly in front of the uncovered window. Someone had been watching closely enough to notice. I called the police again, but fingerprints led nowhere. After that, I stayed with my brother for almost a month while trying to break my lease. The landlord eventually let me leave early after I explained everything. I changed my number, deleted most of my social media, and moved to another part of the state. I never got another call after that. But the reason I still think about it all the time is because of something the landlord told me right before I moved out. Apparently, the tenant who lived in my apartment before me was named Daniel. I used to drive for a rideshare app on weekends for extra money. This happened in October of 2022, back when gas prices were insane and I was trying to make enough to cover rent. I usually drove the late night shift because that's when the money was best. Airport runs, drunk college students, people leaving bars, nothing too unusual. Most nights were boring. But one ride still messes with me. It was around 2:07 in the morning when I got a pickup request while sitting outside a gas station. I almost declined it immediately because the pickup location was in an industrial part of town near a bunch of warehouses. There was nothing out there except shipping buildings and trucking lots. But the fare was high. Like weirdly high. The app showed the rider had a perfect 5-star rating, no complaints, and the account had existed for years. So I accepted it. The GPS took me farther and farther away from downtown until eventually there were barely any streetlights left. No traffic. No open businesses. Nothing. I remember checking the address twice because I thought the app had glitched. The pickup point was at the end of a dead-end road beside a chain-link fence. When I got there, nobody was outside. I considered canceling, but right as I reached for my phone, the rear passenger door opened. I hadn't even seen anybody approach the car. A man got into the back seat and quietly shut the door. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. Nothing unusual about him physically. Mid-30s maybe. But something immediately felt off. Usually passengers say hello or confirm their name. This guy said nothing. I glanced at the app. The destination field was blank. That had never happened before. I asked, "Hey, where are we headed?" No response. I thought maybe he didn't hear me, so I asked again. After a few seconds, he quietly said, "Just drive." I laughed awkwardly because I thought he was joking. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. He was staring directly at me. Not angrily. Just intensely. I remember getting this horrible feeling in my stomach. I asked if he could put the destination into the app because I couldn't start the trip otherwise. He kept staring at me for another few seconds before finally saying, "Take the highway west." His voice sounded tired. Flat. I should have ended the ride right there. Instead, because I'm an idiot and because I needed money, I started driving. For the next 10 minutes, the ride was dead silent. No music. No small talk. Nothing except the sound of the tires on the road. Every now and then I'd glance in the mirror and catch him already looking at me. Not at his phone. Not out the window. At me. Eventually I told him again that I needed an address. He reached forward slowly and placed something on the center console beside me. It was cash. A thick stack of $100 bills held together with a rubber band. He said, "Keep driving." At that point, I was seriously considering pulling over and telling him to get out. But before I could say anything, I noticed something else. His hands were shaking. Not slightly. Violently. Like he was terrified. I asked if he was okay. He ignored me. Then after another minute, he suddenly said, "Do you ever feel like somebody's following you?" I didn't answer. He looked out the rear window and whispered, "They found me." That was the moment I decided I was done. I started slowing down and told him I was ending the ride. Immediately his entire tone changed. Not angry. Panicked. He leaned forward between the seats and said, "Don't stop the car." I could smell sweat and cold air coming off his clothes. Then he said something I'll never forget. "If I get out here, they'll see me." I asked who. He just kept looking behind us through the rear windshield. That's when I noticed headlights. Far back in the distance. A black SUV. At first I thought I was imagining things, but over the next few minutes, every time I changed lanes, the SUV changed lanes too. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. The passenger kept staring at it. Then suddenly he told me to take the next exit. I did. The SUV did too. Now my heart was pounding. The passenger ducked lower in the back seat and kept whispering, "Keep driving. Keep driving." I asked him if he was in trouble or if I should call the cops. He snapped at me louder than before. No police. We drove for another 5 minutes before he suddenly told me to pull into an empty truck stop parking lot. The place looked abandoned. No lights except one flickering lamp near the diesel pumps. I stopped the car. The SUV never entered the lot. It just drove past slowly on the highway. The passenger watched it disappear. Then he relaxed instantly. Like all the fear had drained out of him at once. Without another word, he opened the door and stepped out. I said, "Wait, what about the ride?" He leaned back down slightly and said, "You should check your trunk before you go home." Then he shut the door and walked away into the darkness beyond the truck stop. I sat there frozen for probably 30 seconds. Then I locked the doors and drove away immediately. The entire drive home, I kept thinking about what he said. Check your trunk. I convinced myself he was trying to scare me. But when I finally got back to my apartment complex, I still checked. I wish I hadn't. Inside the trunk was a second phone. Old flip phone. No charger. No case. Just sitting there near the spare tire compartment. It definitely hadn't been mine. I stared at it for a long time before finally picking it up. The screen lit up immediately. No lock screen. Just one unread text message. It said, "He talked to you. That means you're involved now." About 2 seconds later, the phone started ringing in my hand. Unknown number. I dropped it back into the trunk. I didn't answer. I slammed the trunk shut and went upstairs. The next morning, I drove straight to a police station and handed them the phone. They asked a lot of questions, but I never really got answers. The weirdest part? When they looked up the ride request, there was no record of it on my account. No pickup location. No fare. Nothing. Like the trip had never happened at all. I stopped driving rideshare after that. It started with a voicemail. I didn't even notice it at first because I usually keep my phone on silent when I'm working. Around lunchtime, I checked my notifications and saw I had a missed call from an unknown number along with a voicemail that was almost 2 minutes long. I figured it was spam. Still, for whatever reason, I played it. At first there was nothing except static and movement, like someone carrying their phone around in their pocket. Then after maybe 15 seconds, I heard a door creak open. A man whispered, "I think she's home." Another voice answered, quieter this time. "Which apartment?" Then the voicemail ended. I remember just staring at my phone for a second thinking it had to be accidental. Maybe somebody butt dialed me during a conversation. It was weird, but not scary. Not yet. I deleted the voicemail and went back to work. That night, around 11:30, someone knocked on my apartment door. Not pounded. Knocked. 3 slow taps. I froze on my couch. Nobody ever visited me that late, especially on a Thursday night. I muted the TV and waited. A few seconds later, the knocking came again. 3 taps. I quietly walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I remember feeling annoyed more than scared at that point. I thought maybe some teenagers were messing around in the hallway. I lived on the 4th floor of an older apartment building, and people were always making noise. So I sat back down. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring until it stopped. A second later, I got another voicemail notification. This one was only 12 seconds long. I played it immediately. All I heard was breathing. Then a whisper. "Wrong apartment." The voicemail ended. I felt this horrible cold sensation in my stomach. I actually got up and checked the lock on my door twice. I barely slept that night. The next morning before work, I mentioned it to the woman in the leasing office downstairs. She looked uncomfortable immediately and asked what number had called me. I showed her. Her expression changed instantly. She asked, "Did they leave any messages?" I told her yes. She hesitated for a few seconds before finally saying, "You should probably call the police if it continues." I asked why. Apparently, 2 months earlier, another tenant in the building had reported strange voicemails and late-night knocks on their door. According to her, nothing ever happened physically, but the tenant moved out shortly afterward. That freaked me out enough that I almost stayed somewhere else that night. But I didn't. Around midnight, my phone rang again. Same number. This time I answered immediately. I said, "Who is this?" Silence. Then the same whisper from the voicemail. "Are you alone?" I hung up instantly. The moment I did, someone knocked on my living room window. I nearly fell off the couch. I lived on the 4th floor. For a second my brain literally couldn't process the sound. But it came again. Tap. 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 Right against the glass beside my couch. I slowly turned my head toward the window. The blinds were closed, but I could see the faint outline of something outside pressing against them. Not a face. Just a shape. I grabbed my phone and ran into the bathroom, locking the door behind me while calling 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line while officers came. I remember sitting there hearing footsteps moving around outside my apartment for several minutes. Not running. Walking. Slowly. The police arrived surprisingly fast. They searched the entire floor, the roof, the stairwells, everything. Nobody was there. What they did find, though, made me move out less than a week later. On the roof directly above my apartment window, officers found a folding ladder lying flat near the edge of the building. One of the officers told me somebody could have climbed from the fire escape onto the roof and then lowered themselves down far enough to reach my window. What bothered me most was what they found beside the ladder. 3 cigarette butts. Still warm. I changed my number after that. Never got another call. But sometimes I still think about those voicemails, especially the first one. Which apartment? Because whoever those people were, I really don't think they had the wrong place the first time.